As already stated, my name is Körver. I'm a last year cardiology resident and PhD candidate in the Maastricht University Hospital. And I am a core member lab, and for the NOAH trial, I'll assess the AHRE reports. Okay, first, very short introduction. What are we going to discuss today? First, I'm going to say something about the assessments of the device readouts. And then I'll have a couple of examples of the readouts. And then it's not a quiz that we can participate in a group, but it are readouts from the last 2 weeks. So you can all get a little bit of feeling of what we see and how we assess it. Well, first, a very short overview, atrial high rate episodes. That stands for AHRE. And the different manufacturers use most of the time the mode switch algorithms for the counters, and every manufacturer has a different name or different abbreviation for this. So I put those here for you to see. Okay, how do we assess the readouts? Well, we get the readouts after you uploaded them in the MAUIN database, and it's very important to point out that we can only open and see the PDF files and JPEG files, so only PDF and images. So when you scan or photograph a readout, that's not a problem, but it has to be in JPEG or PDF. And in case it's an image, when you make a photograph or when you make a scan of it, it needs to be sharp and in high quality, because I'll point that out later. Sometimes we have to do measurements on the EGMs. When we get zip files or other file formats, we just can't open them. So then you'll get a comment back to please re-upload another file format. When we can open the file, I'll make a check if all the information we need to assess the report is in the file. And if this, we proceed with the assessment, and if it's not, then we stop there and we mark it as incomplete, and you'll also get it back with a comment. Very essential with everything we do is that we work anonymous. Also today again, I still get reports that are not anonymous, that I can see the patient name, patient living address, sometimes phone numbers. So it's very important to pay attention to that, that you just take a black marker or on the computer put a black box over the name, that all the data is anonymous. I'll just see. Okay, what information is essential for the assessment of the reports? We have a look at the device programming and mostly of the atrial high rate detection setting. The cutoff rate, I'll get back to that later. We look at the beginning and end of the monitor period. So that has to be in the report. And that's important to know, because sometimes when we get a readout that just shows one episode, and then at the top it always shows the date of the last visit with the readout of the device, but then the beginning of the monitor period is missing. So that's important to know. We take a look at the total number of atrial high rate events in the monitor period. And we can do that by looking at the atrial high rate counter in the table, it's in Jude devices or in the episode list. And then we make an assessment how many adequate atrial high rate events are in the report. And we do that by looking at the max duration of an episode and the atrial rate. And we also look at the ATAF burden when that is available in the report. I'm talking of atrial high rate events and adequate atrial high rate events. Now, what is an adequate atrial high rate event? It's an atrial rate detected on the atrial lead of a device that's faster than 170 or 180 beats per minute. And that weight cutoff is depending on the country of the investigator site. And the atrial high rate has to be longer than 6 minutes. I'll get back on my remark of the country. A special situation is for the manufacturer Sorin or Livanova or Microport or AHRE Medical. There we have another definition of an adequate atrial high weight event, and that's just when the fallback mode switch is longer than 6 minutes. And the reason for that is that this specific manufacturer does not have an atrial cutoff rate that you can program, but it has a sliding 32 interval window in which it continuously is measuring the atrial weight and then activates the mode switch. So for this specific manufacturer, we use another cutoff rate. Okay, I just said that there's a cutoff rate of 170 or 180 beats per minute, and there's an amendment in progress, and a lot of countries already accepted it and was effective. Well, this is the list of the 170 beats per minute countries at this moment. You see the list at the right. It's Spain, Great Britain, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Hungary, Sweden, Poland, the Czech Republic, and 2 sites in Italy. And all those countries use an atrial high weight cutoff of 170 beats per minute. So please pay attention to that when you are programming that specific parameter. And the other countries still have an atrial high weight cutoff of 180 beats per minute. Until in every country the amendment has passed. Okay, what's the risk of programming this cutoff rate not properly? When the most risk for the trial is when it's programmed too low, and that's why we have to disqualify those reports, because it gives a risk of false positives. And when it's a short periods of 7-8 minutes, then there's a very high risk that the atrial rate could have been, for example, if it's programmed at a cutoff of 150 beats per minute, that the atrial high weight dipped from 180 to 155 and then went back to 170. But for the trial, it was too slow. So when it's a short period, it's instantly disqualified. When it's a very long episode, there's still a risk that somewhere in the period the weight would have dropped. But when we have an average atrial weight, some devices give that, and it's far above 180 beats per minute, then it's likely that at least in an episode of a lot of hours, there was 6 minutes that were above 180 beats per minute. So then we could qualify that as an adequate atrial high weight. But it's really case-by-case judgment. And when the program cutoff rate is too high, then there's a risk of false negatives. And that's just that we could miss atrial high weight events, because those events, when it's programmed at 200 beats per minute or higher, the patient could have atrial high weight events of 190 beats per minute, and we just would miss them. Okay, the number of the atrial high weight events in the device readouts, best is to look at the atrial high weight counter, because that gives a complete count of how many there were. And there's, between the manufacturers, is there a difference between the number of mode switches and the numbers of atrial high weight events. We have to look at the second one, because sometimes mode switch has another definition programmed than an atrial high weight event. Second best is by looking at an episode list. We get a lot of those, but there are limitations of them, because normally the device has a maximum number of atrial high weight events that the device can save for a long period. For example, there are Medtronic devices that can save up to 50 episodes, but there are also Biotronic devices that can save to maximum 20 episodes. And then we see that the counter has, for example, 70 episodes of atrial high weight events, and the episode list only shows 20 episodes. So then we get an underestimation of the number of adequate atrial high weight events, because then I can't assess all of them. An alternative is using the table in the readout, mostly in St. Jude or Abbott devices, but then we more get an estimation of the number of adequate episodes than that we get an exact number of them. I'll have an example of that later. Well, this is very simple. 1 minute is 60 seconds, 60,000 milliseconds. If you want to know how many beats per minute and you have an atrial weight in milliseconds, then you have to divide 60,000 milliseconds by the atrial weight in milliseconds, and you get it in beats per minute. That's very straightforward. And here's an example of that. This is a device readout, an EGM. When we see a large box is 5 millimeters, and that's 0.2 seconds or 200 milliseconds. And 5 large boxes are 25 millimeters, and that equals 1 second. When we then look at the interval, between two events, that's 200 milliseconds, and that equals to 300 beats per minute on the atrial lead. And on the ventricular lead, we see that the interval is 400 milliseconds, and that equals to 150 beats per minute. This is an example where it's a very slow rhythm, and this is atrial fibrillation. This is not atrial fibrillation. We see there's a one-to-one, how do you say it? There's a one-to-one relationship between the atrium and the ventricle. But there's 1,000 milliseconds between two atrial events, and that's 60 beats per minute. So the higher the atrial weight in milliseconds, the lower the weight in beats per minute. And for the NOAH trial, the atrial weight should be shorter than 333 milliseconds or 353 milliseconds, depending on which country your site is in. Well, there's another problem with reported intervals when we get the EGM, because we also have to know the maximum weight of an atrial high weight event. And when you look at this example, we see here that it's a fast atrial rhythm, but it's most of the time the atrial event falls into a refractory period of the device, and then it labels it as refractory, but it doesn't give you an interval. This is an enlargement of the section. So you see, this is every event. No, this is not. This is in the PVAP. But all these events are in a refractory period, and it says here a pace at 3,100 milliseconds. The device for the interval just ignores all these intervals before. So we can't always just look at the numbers, and we have to do manual calculations. So that's why I said earlier, it's important when you upload an image or a photograph of a readout, it has to be in good quality, because we have to make an assessment on the EGM of this. And then a side note, sometimes I get reports in Cyrillic script, and that's just a question. Please upload them in English, because I have to reject them directly, because I just can't read it. So please use English script only. Okay, a couple of examples. With each example, the atrial high weight cutoff was set correctly for that specific country. This is a St. Jude device, and we see here the just let me have a look. We see here that it was an atrial high weight event of 6 hours and 29 minutes, and the maximum atrial frequency was 640 beats per minute. That's also the max the device can measure. So when we look at it, this is an I already said the atrial high weight cutoff was set properly, so we know it was 6 hours and 29 minutes above the atrial high weight cutoff. So this is an adequate episode. This is an example of also St. Jude, and then this is the table I referred to earlier. When we look at it, we see here that there were first the detection limit is set at 180 beats per minute, and all episodes, of course, were faster because the slower ones weren't even recorded. And then when we look at the duration, because we need that to assess the episode if it was adequate or not, we see that 7 episodes were shorter than 1 minute, so those are rejected. but there are 2 episodes that are 24 hours or longer. So there are 9 atrial high weight events, and 2 of them were adequate. This is a Medtronic advisor. We have all the information here. There was 9th of March, there was an episode of 5 hours and 19 minutes with a maximum atrial weight of 545, average of 300. So the detection weight was programmed properly, so we know the entire episode was above the atrial high weight cutoff. So this is also an adequate episode. This was an example I also got. I put a black box over it because it was not anonymous. Again, this is very important to pay attention to. And when we then look at it, there were 9 atrial episodes, but the longest atrial episodes was 2 minutes and 59 minutes, 2 minutes and 59 seconds. So we know this is not a correct episode, not an adequate atrial high weight event. Then a couple of readouts I got the last weeks. Again, a Medtronic pacemaker. Just let me have a look. We see here that the atrial high weight detection was set at 175 beats per minute. So it's important to program that to 170 beats per minute. But in most Medtronic devices, you program the milliseconds, so that would be 350 milliseconds, and then you would get a cutoff rate of 171. But that's just because the device won't accept the 170 beats per minute. But when we look at this cutoff rate, and we see that there were 1 atrial high weight episode with a duration of 12 hours, we already know that it's an adequate episode. Then an example from Boston Scientific. This is an example which I can use to explain my earlier point. When I just get this and a print screen of an episode, I have the patient was interrogated, but I don't have the beginning of the monitor episode period. So I can't put that in the report. But when we look at this specific episode, we see that it had a duration of 1 second, and that's just too short to call it an adequate atrial high weight event. So 1 episode, and even that is a little, we can argue about that, but 1 episode and 0 adequate atrial high weight events. This is a nice example of a Soren device. And this is to illustrate why I ask to upload sharp and qualitatively good images from the readout, because well, this is bad quality, but it's a Soren device. So we have the second definition of an atrial high weight event, of an adequate atrial high weight event. It has to have a duration more or equal to 6 minutes. And we see that the duration was 5 hours and 59 minutes. So this is an adequate atrial high weight event. And but when I didn't have these interval markers, I have to measure it by hand. So that's why I need the high quality readouts. This is again a St. Jude medical device. When we look here, we have the date of today and we have the date of the last readout. And with St. Jude, there is a funny thing that it has a date of last readout, and it also has a date of last reset or clear. So that can be very confusing, that you have a date that the episodes were last cleared or reset, and a date that the device was last interrogated. When we look at this, we see that there are a lot of atrial high weight events. And when we look at the duration, we see here that there are also events of 1 hour and 51 minutes. So the duration is good, but we don't know the atrial high weight cutoff when it is above 170 or 180. it's correctly set, but when it's set at 150 beats per minute, for example, this I can't qualify these as adequate atrial high weight events. Okay, examples from, well, it says this week, but it's from 3 weeks ago. An example from the Netherlands. I don't know what center. 828. Then when we look at it, we have an episode list with atrial high weight events, but also ventricular high weight events. The atrial high weight events were 1200, more than that. And we see at the duration that they are all very short. There's one atrial high weight event of 8 minutes. And when we then look at the atrial cutoff rate, it's set at 180 beats per minute. It should be 170 for the Netherlands, but this is an adequate, these are adequate episodes. And when we then look at the white table, we can see that there are 12 episodes that are long enough. Well, actually 4, because the box with which shows 8 episodes, we don't know if there are 5 minutes and 2 seconds or that they are 10 minutes, so we have to ignore them. So it's this readout, 4 episodes are adequate of a total of 1220 episodes. It could have been more, but because we don't have the complete episode list of all those episodes, that would be impossible for the device to save. We can't be sure of that. And we only register those that we are sure of. Another example from the Ukraine. I had to make this anonymous. It's only the fact that it wasn't anonymous, but for the rest, it was a very nice readout, because on one page I have all the relevant information. We see the collection period from July 2018 to February 2019. We see the atrial detection rate, 180 beats per minute. That's correct for the Ukraine. We have the counter for atrial high weight episodes, and we have the episode list, so we can see the duration. So we have 4 episodes, of which 2 are adequate. Oh, that was 2 first. 2 are adequate. So apart from the fact that it wasn't anonymous, you can have all the information on one page. An example from Austria, Boston Scientific. Just let me have a look. My computer is acting up. Okay, this is also an example of the difference between the last readout and the last reset, because we see here the date of interrogation was August 2018. Oh no, the date of interrogation was 28 February 2019. The last interrogation of the device was the 23rd August of 2018. But there's also a last reset date of 19 October 2017. And this is important for the assessment of atrial high weight events, because when we look at the episode list, we can see that there were atrial high weight events, but they all, just let me have a look, they are in the period of October 2018 to November 2018. And the problem with this is that we only have a atrial and ventricular weight, but we don't have a duration. So I can't assess these episodes. I don't know if they are adequate or not. This is an example from Austria of February 2019. We see that the atrial cutoff rate is programmed 180. That should be 170. And I had to make it anonymous. And then when we look at the atrial burden, we see that there are 0 episodes. So that's also a possibility. Then a case from Germany. It's an AHRE medical device. And we see that there's 1 mode switch in the monitor period, but the total duration of the mode switch was 1 minute 36 seconds. So that's too short to qualify as an adequate atrial high weight event. Another example from Germany is a biotronic device. We see here that the atrial high weight cutoff has been programmed at 200 beats per minute. That's too high. So this has to be reprogrammed to 170 beats per minute. And when we look at the episode list, the last checkup in the hospital was the 23rd August 2018. And when we then look at this, there are 9 episodes recorded, but all those 9 episodes were before the last checkup in the hospital. So these are old recording. Then there is a difference between this when it's regarding a follow-up visit. Then I have to ignore them and report it as 0 atrial high weight events. But when you are including a patient, there's no limit on that. You can use all the atrial high weight events. So actually this was a report from a follow-up visit, and I had to disqualify these and report that there were no episodes between August 2018 and March 2019. But when you're looking for patients to include, you can use this. And then a last example from Sweden. We see here that the atrial detection rate is programmed 180 beats per minute. That should be 170 beats per minute. There was an AF detection of 3 episodes since the 22nd of May last year. And then again, when we look at the tables, we see that all those episodes were shorter than 5 minutes. So there were no adequate atrial high weight events in this readout. So this is what I wanted to tell you and show you. To summarize, I explained what information we need in the report, how we assess the device reports, and I showed you a lot of examples from different manufacturers of the reports and how I look at them while assessing them. So I don't know if there are any questions.